Doing
Doing
great.
good. Steve,
Wonderful
how's it
day.
going, buddy?
Good.
It's beautiful. Nice breeze.
Good deal.
Are you adapting to all the COVID stuff and staying safe over there, staying secluded, and everything going good at Everglades Foundation?
We're doing well, thank you. Yeah, all of us working from home, and it seems like the hour I save each day from commuting is translated into more work. So it's been really productive.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's good deal. That's exciting. We tried this, Steve, last week with Chris and I, and it was an epic failure. Um, we've done a bunch of rehearsals and kind of updated our technology, and I think we're in a little bit better spot. I mean, we can all see and hear each other. Chris, his internet is like the original internet line that was run to Florida, so he's drove to our office and he's sitting in his truck out front. So we've got better connection, so that's all good. And we just kind of want to use this time to first of all introduce you to a lot of our followers, and just to kind of talk about Florida Bay, which is I think probably in the worst shape right now of the estuaries, just given the current circumstances. So before we get into Florida Bay, Chris and I met you through, getting involved with all this water stuff. I guess that was, 4 years ago now, close to 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And why don't you give us just a little bit of a background on, what you do, why you're involved with Everglades stuff, what it means to you, all that.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this today. I started working in Florida Bay in 1995 as a PhD student at Florida International University. And at the time this was pre-SERP, so before the Everglades Restoration Plan was developed. And we had just begun working with the Water Management District to look at how increasing freshwater flow into Florida Bay would affect the mangroves, how it would affect the seagrass, how it would affect water quality. And so since that time, I was a professor at Texas A&M University, did Everglades research from Texas. And so just always maintained a love and a connection to South Florida. And given the opportunity to work at the Everglades Foundation starting in 2009, it was kind of a no-brainer. They take science and translate it into action and policy. And so for me, at that point in my career, that was a really exciting opportunity to apply my science and also to continue working in South Florida and working with groups like captains who are on the ground and really the sentinels of change in our estuaries.
Cool. And, right before we started Captains for Clean Water, and the reason we started it was because we had these terrible discharges over here. But right before we started it, say 6 months before, we started Captains in early 2016, but the summer before in 2015, Florida Bay really crashed. And we were made aware of that just from, social media had only been around for a few years at that point. I don't think people were as into it as they are now. But historically fishing guides were kind of cliquey, and we talked to each other, that fished out of the same boat ramp. But given this kind of new connection, we were kind of gave us a platform to kind of see and feel what a lot of our buddies were dealing with in different areas. And all the guys down in the upper Keys and the guys that fish out of Flamingo had been raising hell over, there's dead seagrass everywhere. And that was, I remember my uncles and friends that I went and fished Florida Bay with when I was younger telling me about how, we don't get as much flow down here and we've seen these seagrass die-offs. But seeing, fellow fishing guides really struggle from something that was caused by the lack of the water that was causing our problem. Like, we're getting all this extra water that's destroying our estuary. They're not getting enough. It seems pretty simple. So can you give us just kind of an outline of that and how much water flows down there compared to how it used to and why it's needed?
Yeah. I'll just actually back up a little bit. So before I started my graduate work, again in 1995, the algal blooms from the first seagrass die-off were just starting to subside. So this has happened once before, and it started in the late 1980s, again with a drought and also in association with a lack of freshwater connection to Lake Okeechobee. And that's really where the science in Florida Bay got started, and tracking the health of seagrass, tracking the water quality of the bay. It really all started as a result of that last seagrass die-off. In fact, my organization, the Everglades Foundation, sort of grew out of the ashes of that die-off event. And so we learned a lot about the causes of seagrass die-off. We learned a lot about how long it takes the bay to recover from a die-off. And what we saw following that die-off event in the late 80s, early 90s, was that Florida Bay it takes years to recover. And our estimates were that it took about 20 years to get the seagrass habitat, the community, back to what it was pre-die-off. And that carried us to about 2010, 2011. So really the bay was healthy and of sort of a pre-die-off state for 3 years before the next die-off occurred in 2015. And so again, we learned what the causes were. We saw this coming really as early as late 2014. And as that drought really started to take hold in early 2015, and there was a delayed onset to the wet season that year, it was around July, August, where water temperatures were at their highest. Shortly before the die-off, the bay was crystal clear. It was just that the salinity was upwards of 70. We even had a few areas that were over 80 parts per thousand, and that's more than double the salinity of ocean water. So we saw this event developing, and what we heard from the fishing captains that were on the bay, and the Miami Herald actually covered it, was a few days before the die-off, the bay started to look like it had a yellow fog within the water that was sort of settling down over the seagrass meadows that a couple of days later died off. And that was the cue that we had trouble, that there was an accumulation of hydrogen sulfide that was suffocating the grass. And it literally happened overnight. What you described with just huge mats of dead grass, that happened in a matter of a few hours just before sunrise, when the sun would have fueled photosynthesis and allowed that grass to make it another day. It wasn't enough. The grass suffocated and the leaves were ejected, and that's what everyone saw the next day when they were trying to make their way out to their favorite fishing hole.
Yeah, so it happens really quick. You can kind of predict it ramping up, but the actual die-off happens quick. And I think that's something that a lot of people that we had on our charter boats, they referred to seagrass as seaweed, like it was a weed. It was something that was fouling their hook. And it takes education from fishing guides, because it's when you take somebody out on a charter, it's a lot more than cast over there, catch a fish, take a picture. Like it's your responsibility to give them an experience and to teach them about where they're at and why the fish are there. So it's there's a amount of responsibility that a guide has. You're a guide, not a fish hunter. Like there's a lot more to it. And those seagrasses, once you start to explain to people all the benefits they have, and then it's going to take multiple decades, 20 years for that to really recover, and it's largely preventable. So that's the real kicker, and the reason that we need to be pushing for expedited solutions. Can you talk more about why the system is as flashy as it is now, and why it has these weaknesses?
Sure. Well, first of all, you all understand that estuaries are where the rivers meet the sea. And so those are very dynamic places. They're dynamic seasonally with rainfall. You can have an estuary actually move back and forth with changes in rainfall because it's where those mixing zones occur and you get that brackish water. So where an area might be really good for blue crabs at one part of the year, it might be a very different area later on in the year, depending on the rainfall. And so Florida Bay is an estuary. In this case, the river is the river of grass. So it's where fresh water would run off the landscape and it would flow into the bay. It's a very shallow system, very complicated series of bays surrounded by seagrass, mudflats, and mangrove islands. And so each of those little basins within Florida Bay, they have their own behavior as well. Some are better at certain times of the year for fishing, where, you know, and it's a function of freshwater inflow and temperature and migration patterns, et cetera. But so it's a complicated bay that depends on freshwater running off the landscape. And we've changed that greatly. In fact, over the past century, we've seen a more than 50% reduction in freshwater inflow to Florida Bay. And we know this not because we were collecting data 100 years ago, but we have really good paleo records in coral heads, in the mud itself, in the bottom of Florida Bay. We can go down core, which is with greater depth in the mud, and effectively go back in time. And we use all of those paleo indicators to tell us what the salinity was like in the bay, what organisms were living out there. And we know, based on all these independent lines of evidence, that the bay was much fresher than it is today, and that our estimates coincide with what our modern modeling tools show us, and that it was about a 50 to upwards of 75% reduction in freshwater inflow. And that's roughly equivalent to the amount of water that is discharged as an annual average from Lake Okeechobee to the east and the west. So it makes sense that that water that's now going east and west used to flow south, ultimately down into Florida Bay. And so making the bay a saltier ecosystem has had an effect on the seagrass habitat. But what it really has done is it's made the bay more vulnerable to drought and fluctuations in rainfall. When we have an average year to a wet year, the bay does well. It's when we get into these droughts that we start to see these problems developing. And a pet peeve of mine is when we have managers refer to Florida Bay as a rainfall-driven ecosystem. Well, we've made it a rainfall-driven ecosystem. In fact, we've made it a rainfall-dependent ecosystem by diverting fresh water away from it rather than allowing it to flow south.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Stephen. You know, it's, if you look at it as system wide, as the whole system, it's easy. It's pretty easy to see, you know, what needs to be done to correct it. The same water that devastates our ecosystem here is needed in Florida Bay, and that's one of the things that when Daniel and I first started getting involved in this, that we recognized with Everglades restoration and SERP and SEP, that there's a plan to do that, and it's physical, tangible steps that can be made to push a lot more, send a lot more of that water back south, and also to give the system the storage capacity that it needs for times like this. Because basically what we're caught in is this situation where we just cross our fingers for ideal scenarios, and what happens because the system's been fragmented and compartmentalized is those ideal scenarios aren't necessarily the same for what we need here versus Florida Bay. So coming into this year, we hadn't had the big large water, and we saw the fishery respond to that and go into a state of recovery. And the counter to that is Florida Bay is getting even less fresh water now because we're in a drought, and so we're seeing the signs of that, where salinity is starting to rise, and we're starting to get nervous about that ecosystem having a repeat of 2015.
Yeah.
And the idea that we can manage our way out of this with the current system, it doesn't work, because we're constantly kind of sitting here with our fingers crossed, trying to manage that system on a forecast basis, and without the capacity within the system to give water down to the Everglades and Florida Bay when we need it. It's not a good situation to be in, because we're just one step away from disaster on our coast, on the East Coast or West Coast, if we're in a year with too much fresh water, and we're one step away from disaster for the Southern Everglades and Florida Bay if we're in a drought year. And we need to be able to add that balance and the ability of balance back into that system through Everglades restoration. And I think that's something that's important to make people understand, or help people understand, is that there's these different components of the system which are intended to mimic the timing and delivery abilities of fresh water throughout the system in order to restore the balance.
Yeah, and I've got a couple responses to that. One, it's sort of the macro scale, and you touched on it. The need for storage with restoration is really, it should be viewed as a prosthesis. It helps us to mimic and provide water managers with the tools that the natural system did on its own. It was a massive connected ecosystem from the Everglades up through Lake Okeechobee and even to the north. We've disconnected that, we've compartmentalized it. So the only way that we can get water back to the Everglades and have the storage capacity to provide that water when it's needed most, which is right now, we need to build reservoirs. And so the reservoir, the Everglades Reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee, that is one of the key projects that allows us to do that. So right now we would be drawing from that reservoir, absolutely. And when it's discharging, when that water is not wanted on the east and west coast, that's when you'd be filling. So that's kind of the big scale of why we need that. Right now, there's nothing we can do. It's too late to do something about it. Water managers are trying to send a little bit of water into Taylor Slough near the entrance of the park. There's no water going under Tamiami Trail into Shark River Slough. That little amount of water that's going into Taylor Slough is doing nothing. One, because it's such a small quantity relative to what's evaporating off the surface of the bay, but also you need water coming in from both sides. You got to have water coming through Shark River Slough, around Cape Sable to the west. You got to have water coming in from Taylor Slough. And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge the importance of Shark River Slough. Empirically, we've got the data to show that. And just
Something that's important to Cape Sable to the west.
Those that navigate the bay understand that there's a pretty substantial divide between Eastern Bay and Western Bay. The drag over under Madeira Bay and over into Terrapin Bay, that area, there's not a lot of water exchange. And you fish out there, you know it, there's not much of a tidal signal once you get beyond that. So you got to have water coming from both sources, and you need more than what we have right now to be able to stop this train wreck from happening.
Thanks, Steve. We've got a bunch of questions and comments coming in.
Sure.
First, there's some people asking, what can people do to help? Education and awareness is key. 10 years ago, very few people knew much about this issue. even 4 or 5 years ago, very few people knew. We're all working, Captains, Everglades Foundation, all these organizations working together. Our number one goal is to get more people aware, because I promise you, if y'all could see some of the hell that we've seen on the water, animals dying, seagrass dying, oysters dying, just absolute, collapse and destruction. If the people that were making decisions had to live through that the way that we did, this problem would have been fixed a long time ago. COVID-19 is a perfect example. When there's a crisis, we can figure out a way to react to it, to really, I mean, a month ago, 2 months ago, before this started, who would have thought we would all been penned up in our homes? I mean, that's never happened in any of our lifetimes. So that same, locking yourself in your house isn't going to stop the algae blooms, but there can be more aggressive actions that can really, expedite these projects so we don't have to suffer. And the more people are aware of it, the better. So for everybody asking that question, hit the share button on this video and tag 3 friends. 3 friends that you think don't know about this, that need some education. Dr. Davis with the Everglades Foundation, he's dedicated his life to science and has spent decades working specifically on Everglades stuff. So this is a great educational opportunity. Hit the share button. Send this to your friends. If anybody lives in Florida, vacations in Florida, this is something they need to be educated on. A lot of people don't know. Our drinking water supply in South Florida is dependent on sheet flow in the Everglades, rehydrating the aquifers. So if we're going to continue to live in Florida for decades or even generations to come, we can't do it without a healthy Everglades. It's absolutely critical to our life, for fishing, for recreating and outdoors, but also for when you turn on the tap and get your drinking water, that comes from the ground. And without sheet flow, those aquifers don't get recharged. You actually get salt water seeping into them, causing even more expensive problems to fix. So hit the share button on that. We've got a bunch of people watching here. The more we can get on, the better. Couple more comments coming in for some fishing guides. Captain Benny Blanco from down in the Everglades, said that him and some of his buddies have been out there with refractometers, which I believe you got to them, Steve, and they're getting average of 38 parts per thousand salinity, which I used to keep reef tanks, and 36 is seawater, so it's already higher than seawater, and we still have a long way to go in the drought. I saw Josh Greer, who's a guide up here, but spent a lot of time fishing down in Florida Bay. I think we kind of hit on this, but we can answer it again. Should we be worried about that same die-off situation that we saw in the late 80s and in 2015 with the drought we're in now and above average temperatures?
Well, there are actually that point about above average temperatures. That's a critical component of this. It starts with hypersalinity, extreme hypersalinity, but temperature also plays a role, and just the chemistry of water, the physics, and its ability to hold oxygen, which you all understand how important dissolved oxygen is dependent not only on salinity, but also temperature. As salinity goes up, and especially as it goes above the salinity of ocean water, its ability to hold oxygen goes down. Likewise, as temperature goes up, the ability of that water to hold oxygen goes down. So when you have both of these factors combined, oxygen levels plummet. And so hypersaline conditions in the middle of winter aren't as bad as hypersaline conditions in the middle of summer. And so that's no surprise when we get these die-offs occurring. We're at a situation right now where we're roughly tracking where we were in 2015 at this time. Salinity levels at a few of the indicator locations that I use, like Lower Taylor River and Garfield Bight, are approximate to where they were in April of 2015. Now, what happened in 2015 with the delayed onset to the wet season is what really carried the problem forward. We didn't have any rainfall in June. We didn't have any rainfall in July, and it was too late in August when that wet season rain started to arrive. And then, just ironically carrying that forward, you all know what happened in December of 2015 when we had all those El Nino rains, and the discharges from lakes started in January of 2016. So it's crazy that we allow this system to yo-yo the way it does, and simply because we don't have the tools to manage it in a more natural way. But the answer to that question is we're roughly on track of where we were with the previous die-off. My hope and what the forecasters are calling for is a slightly wetter than average April, May, June, which hopefully means that we'll get enough rain to prevent that disaster from occurring again.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain that, Stephen. Bringing balance back to the entire system as a fisherman is the key. If we looked at these symptoms regionally, it doesn't provide you the long-term path for recovery for the system as a whole. There's times we see that our fisheries can go into recovery, and they do that, but they're just not able to recover long enough before they're impacted again.
That's right.
When we got these discharges here in 2016 and then again in 2018, we're just now seeing the damage that was done there. We're starting to see some recovery in the very beginning stages, 2 years later. And if this ecosystem here is able to continue on a path of recovery, it will do so. But if we get another year of discharges like that in a year or two from now, we'll be back in a worse case than we were, at the end of 2018. And the same thing goes for Florida Bay. The same thing goes for Lake Okeechobee. The current tools that we have aren't enough to manage the whole system in a balanced scenario. And so by implementing Everglades restoration, it gives us simply more tools, more outlets, more tools in our tool chest to add balance back to the system as a whole. It, in essence, brings up the valleys and brings down the peaks so that there's not these big swings. And it's big swings here in Pine Island Sound, Southwest Florida, the St. Lucie River, Florida Bay, the Everglades, but also in Lake Okeechobee. We shouldn't be in a scenario where we see that lake go from, 17 plus feet to 10 feet. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Okeechobee or Florida Bay.
Yep.
None of these systems can handle these massive swings. And I think that's the key thing to stay focused on, and why we see Everglades restoration as such a key suite of projects to fix this. Is it's not about stopping water from getting into the lake so that it doesn't get discharged out the east or west coast. It's about returning balance back to that system, because if we only look at little parts of it, other parts of it are still bound to suffer.
Yeah, definitely.
You brought up a really good point there, and I when you talk about these tools and managing for the highs and lows, managing for the highs is like, think of a surge protector that you use to protect your computer from a lightning strike. That's where you need something like storage to help deal with those highs, some place to put that excess water when it's arriving, because it's coming. At the low end, it's about storage, and think about having battery storage for your house. If you have solar or something, when the power goes out, what are you going to draw from? Well, you get it during the day from your solar, but you need the battery to get you through the night. And so the reservoir also provides that storage capacity. So it's both surge protection and it's storage. And that's how people need to think about these tools, because the Everglades is not going to look like it used to. It's simply not. We're not going to get all that land back. And so these restoration projects are these prostheses that provide those same functional qualities that the natural system had. So thanks.
Yeah,
that's definitely. And I wanted to give a couple more quick shout outs here. I saw Cheryl Meads, who's the South Florida Water Management District governing board member, of the Florida Bay area and the Keys. She's actually tuned in watching this. I had a couple more on the list here. But I wanted to thank her not only for tuning into this, but also, coming down and checking out Florida Bay with us and getting our perspective on it. I know Benny and a bunch of his buddies down there, a bunch of fishing guides, worked with us to get a bunch of agency folks out earlier this year or later last year. I can't remember. It all blends together. A couple months ago, and seeing, you can't experience Florida Bay unless you're on a little Hell's Bay or a little skiff pulling around in there. You don't get the experience from going out in a pontoon boat. Like, you need to get up on the flats and see where all that grass used to be, and then look at the pictures, of that grass that used to be, 18 inches plus, and crystal clear, gin clear water. Seeing that, major contrast, like, in my opinion, nobody should be ever allowed to make decisions regarding this until they've got down there, got on the front of a skiff, been pulled around, heard stories, seen old photos, because it's Florida Bay was probably the top destination for anglers in Florida for decades. And as Benny came in here again and said, Florida Bay will not survive another summer like 2015. We saw what happened after Irma. All that water in the central and southern Everglades flowed down there. We had a record hatch of fish. There's more fish down there in Florida Bay than there has been, since the seagrass died off. There's tons of redfish, tons of snook, but there's not habitat to sustain that. And if that grass doesn't come back, those fish are going to be gone. You can't have that much life sustained in an estuary without the foundation being healthy. So it's super critical, to expedite this. And I think especially in times like these, there's, when we're being asked to lock ourselves in our homes, I mean, just the places like this are waterways. It's an escape, where we can go and practice social distancing and spend some time, really appreciating these areas, or reflecting on them and realizing, this is definitely something worth protecting. And after this COVID-19 stuff comes to an end, these places are going to be far more important than they were before. Because I know Southwest Florida, our home over here, March, April, May is our economy is, largely dependent on those 3 months. And, we can't control hurricanes. We can't control coronavirus. Sure, we can take precautionary measures, but we can't control the economic, consequences of this down the road. Like, we got to do what we got to do, collectively as a country and as a world to stop this. And part of that's staying at home. Like, we can't control that part of the economy, but our water quality is fully within our control. We're not putting a man on the moon. We're not building, a skyscraper. We're not building, we're not putting people on Mars. We're literally rebuilding a swamp. It's not rocket science. I'm glad we have scientists like you, Steve, and all the other ones at the Water Management District and at Everglades Foundation and all the organizations working on this. But I mean, fundamentally, this is simple, isn't it? I mean, it's not rocket science.
It is, and we've had the plan since 2000. I can say confidently that we've made more progress in the last decade than we did the first decade, and we still have more progress to go. Getting that reservoir built is essential. Getting other key projects like C43 and hopefully getting a water quality component with that reservoir will help to provide the water source, the clean water source for this time of year. We've got the bridges along Tamiami Trail. We got a few minor things to finish down there, but it's really just providing that storage and conveyance to get the water down to Everglades National Park and Florida Bay where it's needed.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, Daniel touched on it a little bit. Just like our estuaries, get hit, and if they get hit and they're given the right atmosphere, they can recover. But if they if they take these hits every other year, every third year, there's no way for those systems to recover. And it's the exact same scenario with our economy that relies on those systems. We're largely a tourism based economy here, and when our economy takes a hit like it did in 2016 or 2018, I mean, that puts small businesses, which those small business owners and that make up our community here, those are the drivers for our economy. We don't have big industry, you know, we rely on those businesses. And so when they take those hits, it's all they can do to survive that. So coming out of something like this coronavirus pandemic, that is taking such a hit on the economy, not just here locally or regionally, but across the world. And many of the people that come here to spend their money, and those dollars go into our economy and sustain it throughout the summer, that part of our economy can't get hit like that over and over and expect those businesses to survive any more than we can expect our ecosystems or the wildlife to survive. If we come out of this, epidemic here and are lucky enough to have decent weather and decent conditions where tourists can come back and water quality is still good, our businesses and our economy can and will rebound. But if we come out of this into another 2018 or 2015 in Florida Bay, the economy is already been crippled, and it'll simply be devastated. So it's really critical that while we're focused on COVID-19 right now and doing everything we can to flatten the curve there and slow the cases of that, we've got to also stay really laser focused on the importance of water quality in order for us to flatten that downward curve of the impact that this is having on our economy. We got to know that we have to know that we're in a place where the balance is restored to this system, the ecosystems can thrive, our economy can thrive, so that we can sustain any of these other things that are out of our control, like hurricanes or global pandemics.
Yeah, I agree completely. Our perhaps unlike any other state in this country, our economy is all about water, and the cleaner the water, the better. You talk to economists, and they'll say that they can actually quantify reductions in real estate value just simply based on the color of the water, the turbidity of the water, the lack of oxygen in that water. Those metrics are widely established throughout the economic field. And it's not just about real estate. It translates, as you described, to all of these other sectors of our tourist-based economy in Florida. So it goes without saying that the more we can protect that water and keep it clean, the more we all benefit.
Yeah.
We actually just had a question come in about the ASRs. Where do they stand, and kind of how those play into this. And I think being in a drought, it's kind of a good time to talk about that. It's the roughly half the water that gets put down in there is lost. There's contaminants when that water is drawn up out of the aquifer. So Steve, can you talk about that and just kind of how that comes into play with and by the way, as Steve is talking about this, if you all have any other questions, put them in the comments. We'll scroll through them. But yeah, can you just kind of talk about the ASR wells? I know it's something that we spoke out against, and y'all have as well.
Well, ASR at a very small scale works on the order of a few wells. That works, and there are communities across the country that rely on ASRs for their water supply. They store it when it's in abundance, especially areas in the arid Southwest. I'm familiar with some projects in the San Antonio area where they store it in the Edwards Aquifer, which is also a limestone-based aquifer. So it works at a small scale.
And Steve, just to cut you off for a second here, ASRs, it's called Aquifer Storage and Recovery, and it's essentially pumping water down into the drinking aquifer with like pressurized pumps, and then the R part of its recovery during drought, attempting to remove that. Just for the people that are not familiar with all the crazy acronyms and everything that goes along with water management.
That's right. And it's also not to be confused with deep well injection, which is where ASR is sending water down a few hundred to 1,000 feet. The deep well injection sends it down 3,000 to 4,000 feet, and it's a one-way street. It's basically getting rid of water. Aquifer storage has a recovery component, the R, that allows water managers to pull some of that water back out. At scale, it's unlikely that they'll get anywhere near 100% recovery. So what they do is they take the water, inject it into an aquifer, create a bubble of that water that they can then pull from later on. Again, it's not something that's been tested at scale. We've raised serious concerns about the scaling that's been proposed, even as part of the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, where they would have upwards of 80 wells. It was a component that was included as part of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. Even before they started implementing it, the National Academy of Sciences went back and reviewed the plan, and they realized that it's probably only feasible at about a third of the capacity that they originally thought. So even without any testing or implementation, they got back, the recommendation that it's not feasible at scale. So it's something that's being talked about. We would rather see investment in technologies like reservoir storage that we know are reliable, that deliver benefits to the Everglades, rather than just injecting water north of the lake and not having any benefit at all to the Everglades and certainly to Florida Bay. So we've been advocating for the Everglades Reservoir because we know that's a project that cuts discharges on the order of 55% and sends a substantial quantity of water back to the south, over 200 billion gallons a year.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve, is, when we're looking at projects throughout SERP, you've got a bunch of projects. Some of them have, minor measurable benefits. They all have some benefit, but some of them have a little bit of benefit. Some of them have a great deal of benefit. And when we're looking at, a suite of projects that originally was slated to take 30 years, that now is behind schedule. And, this is the largest, a lot of people don't know this. This is the largest restoration project or suite of projects ever undertaken in the world. And so when we're looking at which projects to do, we can't fund all those projects and do them all simultaneously. So the funding is a very real limiting factor. And we know that what we don't have on our side is time. Our ecosystem and our economy do not have the time to wait. We need fixes now. And so we need to do projects that have the greatest benefit to the system as a whole. And when we start looking at things like ASR, there might be some measurable benefits, some minor benefits, but they're not the big benefits. And when we're talking about spending, close to $10 million per well, you're talking about 80 wells. I mean, do the math there. You're close to $1 billion. And that money can be spent on projects that will provide benefit not only to Okeechobee and Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie, but also Everglades National Park and Florida Bay. And it's important to prioritize projects that are going to give us the biggest return on investment for our dollars, our money. It's our taxpayer dollars. We want to see that money spent in a situation that's going to give us the biggest ROI the soonest. We don't want to start with little projects of what we can do here in Fort Myers or Okeechobee that don't do anything for the other parts of the system. And it comes back to, asking the question for proposed solutions or projects of where to put them on that integrated delivery schedule of, do they help the Pine Island Sound, Southwest Florida? Do they help St. Lucie River and the East Coast? Do they help Everglades National Park, the interior of the park? And we know when those peat bogs and marshes dry up, what happens there? And do they help Florida Bay and the Keys? And we need to look at ones that check all those boxes rather than just one of them.
Or as many as possible.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and to that point, also making sure that we're not, potentially digging another hole or getting ourselves into, unintended consequences. Like Steve said, it's never been implemented at this scale before. So, I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I'm a former fishing guide that's, whatever, get involved with water quality stuff now. But I mean, I've also got a garden here. I grow all kinds of tropical fruits and stuff. And one thing that I've noticed is, we're in a drought now. I'm selectively watering, some of my fruit trees. My bananas do not like well water. When I pull the well water out, they don't grow. It doesn't matter how much you water them. I even tried split, 5 or 6 of them on one side of the yard. I was watering all the time. The other ones I didn't water at all. They were growing at the same rate. Now, once the rains start, and good, clean rainwater coming down, they take off and go crazy. Even some of my mangoes, like certain varieties of mangoes, love the well water. Others don't take it at all. Like, it'll actually make them look kind of sick if you're just irrigating them with, I just have a 25-foot irrigation well that I'm sucking out of for that. So it's certainly not the same water that's falling from the sky. And I know looking at, just kind of how that nature takes everything. I mean, sure, like from an engineering perspective, this will either work or it won't work. We haven't really proven the scale, but, in the grand scheme of things, is this a good idea, or are we doing something, is it a dumbass idea? Because, I don't think anybody thought when they connected the Caloosahatchee to Lake Okeechobee and dammed the Everglades, I don't think anybody was like, oh, wow, that's a dumbass idea. But, fast forward the clock 100 years, and I'm pretty sure that's the consensus that we've come to. It's, wow, that was really not a good idea. You're seeing these, 40, 50,000 acre seagrass die-offs. You're seeing, toxic algae that's, got neurodegenerative diseases that have now been linked to it. And, all this stuff, it's kind of like, let's not try to engineer our way out of one problem and into another problem that's very intermingled with our drinking water, which we absolutely cannot live without. So I think that, when you spend time outdoors, you start to kind of look at things a little differently. And, if you're not looking, under every stone and every leaf and really looking at it from that big picture of how everything's affected, you'll often, move forward with something that can cause, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
We've got another question that just came in from Cheryl Meads. Can you speak about your view on the increases to water flow south starting August 2020 as a result of the new Combined Operations Plan, which is the COP? The changes to water flows. Oh, thanks, man. UPS interrupted me here for a second. All good. Thank you, sir. Changes to water flow south into Shark River Slough. How much is enough?
Well, we certainly look forward to implementing COP, and as Cheryl knows, part of that has been allowing us to raise water levels along Tamiami Trail. That canal just north of Tamiami Trail is right now our best way of getting water into Northeast Shark River Slough under those bridges. And the way we get more water under those bridges is by raising the water level in the canal. And so COP allows us to do that. When we finish the road raising in between the bridges, we'll be able to raise that water level even higher. But COP will help us to reroute more of that water into Northeast Shark River Slough, away from those S12 structures further out to the west that have been impacting the Cape Sable seaside sparrows. So for a variety of reasons, including the redistribution of water, increasing flows into Northeast Shark River Slough, that's going to be a huge benefit. Once we get the reservoir and the Central Everglades plan implemented, as she knows, we'll be able to raise those canal stages even higher, get more flow south. That's really going to have a big benefit to Florida Bay and throughout Everglades National Park.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've got a comment here about seems like northern storage would benefit the entire system the best. And if you're only looking at segmented parts, you could come to that conclusion. But if you're looking at the whole problem and the whole solutions, you won't come to that conclusion. And what I mean by that is storage. The EAA reservoir has a STA, or a stormwater treatment component. It's a filter marsh that removes nutrients. And we can't just send the water from Lake Okeechobee to the Everglades in Florida Bay. It does a lot of things. There's way too many nutrients. It encourages invasive species like cattails, and you simply are not allowed by law to send polluted water into a national park. So that water has to be cleaned as it should be before it's sent south. We have the ability to do that coming on the south of the lake. You can take that water from there, store it in the reservoir, clean it, and send it to Florida Bay. If you do that same scenario north of Okeechobee and put it back into the lake already has those legacy nutrients in it. So you'd have to then take that water again from there and clean it and store it before you're able to then send it south to the Everglades in Florida Bay. And that same scenario applies to the ASR wells. You can't just inject the lake water or Kissimmee River water straight into the aquifer. It has to be cleaned, sent underground into the aquifer. Then once it's pulled up, it has to be cleaned again, put back into what ends up in Lake Okeechobee, where then it has to be cleaned for a third time before it's sent to the Everglades. So it just, it logically doesn't make the sense. It looks like we might have lost Daniel with some tech difficulties, but it just logically doesn't make sense if you're only looking at one little component. You could get to this, but if you look at the whole picture and you look at not only conveyance of water, but also nutrient load and water quality, then you'll come up with a totally different outcome. And it's important to consider that. We have to address nutrients and nutrient loading and the amount of phosphorus in particular entering Lake Okeechobee. Absolutely. The biggest significance we can see there is north of the lake as far as getting nutrients out of the water before it gets into the lake. But as far as water storage and providing water to Florida Bay and the Everglades, that cannot be achieved north of the lake like it can south.
That's right. You can't send water south to the Everglades and ultimately to Florida Bay with storage north of the lake. It's not to say that's not an important project regionally, but it doesn't deliver any water south. You got to have storage south of the lake to recreate that flow path of water into the water conservation areas and ultimately down to Everglades National Park. That's why the project, at the time it was the EAA reservoir, that was one of the first projects authorized when SERP was passed, because they knew how important that project was. It's just been a challenge to get that project designed and built for a variety of reasons. We ran up against some water quality issues, but we're now to the point where we've got the water quality plan in place, and we've got the understanding of the stormwater treatment area needed to flow more water south. So right now, again, if we had that reservoir, we would be flowing full capacity south because we've got all this unused stormwater treatment area capacity. There's very little water at all, just a trickle coming out of the stormwater treatment areas right now. If we had a reservoir, we could be drawing from that and sending it south. You can't do that with storage north of the lake.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's things like that where when people aren't looking at the system as a singular connected system, that they come up with band-aid solutions, or whatever. And Lynn, she's saying northern storage would certainly help the Caloosahatchee now, but we're not talking about just trying to help one component. We need solutions that help the system as a whole, not just the Caloosahatchee. I could come up with solutions that might help the Caloosahatchee that would have a negative impact on Lake Okeechobee, a negative impact on Florida Bay and the Everglades. But what we know is if we can send clean water south to the Everglades and Florida Bay, that in turn benefits Lake Okeechobee, it benefits the Caloosahatchee, and it benefits the St. Lucie. That's the way nature had it. That's the way Mother Nature built it. That's what we need to get back to. Mother Nature didn't expedite and shoot it down underground and then later on have a geyser coming out we can come up with all kinds of cockamamie scams and schemes to deal with water, but we need to look at man never does it better than nature. The only thing we do is screw it up. And so we need to look at how we can get back to mimicking the natural system and doing it in ways that by doing so, we put balance back into that system, and we don't deal with the threat of having unintended consequences 20 years, 30 years, 50 years down the road that the next generation has to deal with.
Yeah.
And we don't need to play Russian roulette with things like our drinking water aquifers, because we think that it's something that could help. We need to look at this as holistic solutions that are backed by sound science, that we're not going to be going 50 years from now going, well, we thought it was a good idea to build 80 wells and inject a bunch of phosphorus rich water down into the drinking water aquifer, but whoops, guess we shouldn't have done that. I mean, we know that if we can clean the water, we can store it in surface reservoirs and filter and clean it with filter marshes and return that sheet flow, that it hydrates the interior part of the Everglades. It recharges the Florida aquifer slowly through, leaching down through that limestone, recharges that aquifer slowly, keeps that peat hydrated, helps sequestering carbon, which we haven't even touched on that.
Yeah.
Helps to sequester carbon, helps with reduced heat. I mean, if you ever gone out into an area where there's 2 foot of water across the landscape versus an area that is a barren, dry field, I mean, you can have temperature swings of 20 or 30 degrees. And all those things play a role in how severe our thunderstorms are, the ability for the system to deal with either rain or drought. And there's a lot more benefit to sending water south than simply just balancing salinity in Florida Bay. There's a whole bunch of other benefits there that go along with it that you just simply don't get out of injecting water down into an aquifer.
Yeah, you raise a great point. Those organic peat soils in the Everglades, in Northeast Shark River Slough right now, they're dry. And that organic matter is breaking down just like your compost pile, if you've got one. and it's evaporating out to the atmosphere. And that is lost carbon, it's lost habitat, it's lost elevation from the landscape. And that also translates to, impacts to fish and wildlife. Obviously, having no water in the Everglades, it's not good habitat for fish. And the loss of the habitat changes the way wading birds behave, changes the way alligators behave. It affects everything as you described.
Daniel, can you hear Daniel, Steve?
No, I can't hear him.
I can't hear him either.
We can read his lips.
Yeah, I mean, Carrie, looking at the big picture, a long-term natural solution, it's look, we know the way it was. It was a slow-moving river of grass. There's projects north of the lake. Carl talking about the agricultural runoff and nutrients coming into the lake. There are things that we can do north of the lake that can have a benefit. We could have filter marsh. We got you, Daniel.
You got me now?
Yes.
Yep. We could have
Nice.
filter marsh buffers, along those watersheds. But part of that is also identifying the point sources of those nutrient loads. There's a lot that needs to be done there in order to tell where exactly that water is coming from. And then, can we build basically STAs along parts of that watershed to help with nutrient loads, that are compounding in the lake. Also look at how we're managing vegetation within our freshwater bodies. With a lot of the current methods being mainly chemical and chemical and herbicide treatment of invasive non-native plants that we know create large nutrient flashes back in and just return those nutrients that were sequestered in those plants right back into that cycle. We need to be looking system-wide about when we're doing a project with one intent, like managing non-native plants, that are there ways to manage those plants that also have a benefit on removing nutrients from our water, or at least don't have a negative impact on creating a nutrient flash back into that water. And then we need to look at, getting the system to operate back to mimic the way it naturally did. That's the key thing is, there's a lot of benefits. Mother Nature has all these, it's the butterfly effect. It's all interconnected from a microscopic level and things that you never see and never even know exist to the top of the food chain. It's all connected, and restoring that natural flow and the natural movement of water as much as we possibly can back to that system is going to have the benefits, from the things we don't see to the things that are very obvious, a lot more than if we just start, coming up with these really outside the box, proposed solutions.
Yeah. So can you hear me on here? Am I coming through this time?
Gotcha.
I've never run out of gas in my truck my whole life. Never run out of gas in my boat whole life. But this damn computer, every single time I use it, the battery dies. I can't. It's the same concept, but I can't figure it out. So I lost my Bluetooth. There was all kinds of things going on there.
You need
so
more
proud.
storage.
There you go. There you go. No pun. Oh, I guess there was a pun intended there. But yeah, I mean, I was so proud that we did so. The last time was embarrassing. Stephen, Chris, and I were on here doing an update. It was like 30 minutes of like, can you hear me? Can you hear? No, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
It was like those old television. You remember the commercials? I think it was like Sprint or something. Can you hear me now? It was basically 20 minutes of that.
That's funny.
Yeah, but that's the first and only time that Daniel and I have ever been embarrassed, so it's okay.
The first? Wow. It's impressive.
Yep. Now Daniel's frozen. I don't know if he took a selfie or what's going on, but Let's see. I'm just looking back through the comments. Yeah, I mean, some really good questions you guys had. A lot of people just saying we're tuning in and thank you, and people asking for, what can you do? I think, you know, Benny hit the nail on the head. He's commented on here. Daniel touched on it earlier. The biggest thing we can do as a community and as citizens is to recognize the importance of water quality, how
Yep.
each and every one of us depend on it, whether it's economically, whether it's for our drinking water, or whether it's for our way of life. We all depend on it, and recognizing the importance of each individual's collective voice. The reason we'll see progress is is because people pay attention and are vocal. If if we start to see a lack of political will, that's a result of the public not paying attention and putting pressure on policymakers. So the reason we're seeing this progress in the last decade that Steve talked about earlier
Yep.
is because the public is paying attention more than ever. They're educating themselves to a much higher level than they ever had before, myself included, Daniel included, and they're taking action like they haven't been before. I'm born and raised here, grew up on Sanibel Island, have been a fishing guide for 20 years, and it's only been in the last 5 years that I've become active in this effort to save what's so critical to Florida with our water quality. So it's something it's not pointing the finger at any one group or person to that they're not involved or to get involved. It's to get our arms around each and every one of us to make our voices heard. And that's the number one thing we can do as a community is recognize it, encourage your friends and family. Videos like this where we can give out some information, like Daniel said, share it with 3 people, ask each one of them to watch it and share it with 3 more people. And there's power in numbers. We've seen that, and I think that's ultimately the most important thing that we can all do is continue to raise the level of education and understanding, and to continue to spread awareness.
And I thank you all for leading that effort, certainly with the fishing community, but even much broader. I mean, your impact in both Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. has certainly been notable. And I think what we're seeing is us working as a community, as you say, more people becoming aware of the issue, and really just recognizing that we don't have to accept the status quo. We can actually benefit all these things that we love in South Florida. And it's just, getting these projects built and seeing the benefits of those projects as they're being built. We've got projects that are near completion. The bridges of Tamiami Trail, Picayune Strand, the habitat restoration project in Collier County, the Kissimmee River Restoration Project. These projects are all delivering benefits at or above what we expected. And so it's just, goes without saying, the more we can do, the more we can see in terms of benefits, the more we're going to expect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you hear me this time?
We got you.
Yes.
Nice. So that last time, I was, technology is going downhill at this point. We need to log off here before this gets much worse. My wife's in there doing her little workout routine. She's streaming something on the inside TV, and it's like, come on, we got too many things going on here. Our internet's not made for that kind of stuff here. So
the matrix is overloaded.
Yeah. It doesn't take much to take my internet down. But no, I just wanted to say that all these comments are coming in. Some really good ones about the spraying. Christopher Holt, Carl Digert about the nutrients entering the lake. About he said what actions are being taken to reduce ag eutrophication north of the lake that accounts for the majority of nutrients flowing in. Those are all great. We could honestly, we've been live for over an hour now. We could do a whole nother segment on each one of those on here. We can bring in some more guests. Y'all can, get a glass of beer, a glass of wine, bottle of wine, glass of whiskey, bottle of whiskey. You never know what's in here. we can't judge through the screen. Nobody can see you. So we'll keep doing these. I think they're good. I think they're educational, and I think it's a good time now that we're all kind of cooped up to do some more learning about the Everglades and about our water quality, and about how dependent we are on all that, living down here in Florida. So I'm looking forward to having more of these. And like I said, y'all can drink as much as you want because nobody can see, and we might even do the same thing. So they'll get more exciting from here on out. I promise that. It was a huge improvement from last time. I know that last time was a disaster.
Steve, thanks a lot for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys. It was
safe.
We are. Thank you. Same to you.
Very good. And thanks a lot, everybody who tuned in. Share this with others, and Chris and Carl and everybody else with your great questions and all these other topics. Look forward to some more of these videos, specifically based on some of those topics coming up soon.
Yeah, and if you have any other questions, you can email info@captainsforcleanwater.org. You can send us a face page message. You can do whatever you want. Just go on our website. There's all kinds of ways to get in touch with us. If you have more ideas or things you want to see, just let us know and comment under this video. We'll go back and watch it. But we'll make sure that going forward we have some a lot more exciting topics to go over and exciting guests. And I'm sure Dr. Steve Davis will be back to join us. I don't think we scared him away this time. So we'll
look forward to
going.
Yeah. Also, guys, before we sign off, if you're not already signed up for our monthly newsletter, you can do so on our website for free. Doesn't cost a thing. We get you some good recaps of what's been going on throughout the month, but also starting with this last one, we're giving you guys some kind of quarantine tools and stuff while we're all sequestered in our houses. We're giving you some staff picks on some of our favorite reads and books about the Everglades or Florida. We're giving you some barbecue tips and hints from Captain Dan, cocktail suggestions, documentary suggestions. So everything from good stuff to eat and drink to good stuff to watch and listen to. So
yeah, and here's my tip of the day. This is from yesterday. So always start your frozen pizzas with a plain cheese pie. That's all you should ever buy. If you're buying frozen pies with toppings on it, there's something wrong with you. Don't do that. Plain cheese pizza. Get your toppings. I mean, this doesn't look good through the camera because I got like some kind of screen protector on here.
Looks pretty good to me.
Margarita on one side, uncured pepperoni on the other. Absolute game changer. I mean, I've been eating frozen pepperoni pies my whole life, and now I feel like I'm living in the Ritz-Carlton. Now I got these dual pizzas, and yeah, we got all kinds of things that we can show you about on that front. We might do another live series on how to stay well fed during the quarantine, because we're definitely doing that.
All right, guys. Well, we hope everybody's staying safe. Be smart, and hopefully, if there is a silver lining from all this, you're taking time to educate yourselves while you're in your houses and have some time on your hands, and you're taking advantage of spending some real quality time with your family. So, look at the bright side and keep in touch. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining.